So this lecture is called Eternal States, and it was done in 1968. Now, this lecture is turning into one of my favorites, and I've read this in the past, but I read it again recently, and it just triggered this dream that I have. I completely forgot about this dream I had in the past that really correlates with what Neville is saying here. So what I love about this lecture is that it's mystical. It's very mystical, but then it's also very practical. And so he starts off by saying that you'll find this teaching to be the most practical in the world of Caesar. He's like, it may not make sense, but I only ask you to try it. So he's basically stating that, of course, the idea of imagining might not make sense to you because it goes against the facts and the reasons and the doubts and all of that of the time that we're in. But he says that just test it. And here's the premise that he starts off with. He quotes Blake. He says, man is all imagination, and God is man, and exists in us, and we in him. The eternal body of man is the imagination, and that is God himself. Now, he says he's going to go into eternal states, but he first wants to define what a state is. He says a state is a body of beliefs. He's like, you sit quietly with yourself and you ask yourself some very permanent questions. He says, who am I? You may be wrong in the answer, but who am I? Where am I? What am I? And all these questions you ask self, they form a body of beliefs. He goes, you don't see them, you believe in them, but you don't see them. And he's like, you also don't see them the way a mystic would see them. He's like basically saying a mystic sees things as personified. The mystic sees states as personified. And an example of that would be wisdom. You take the idea of wisdom, this thing that is inside of man. It's not a person, but the mystic will see it as a personified being. So in scripture, you'll see in Proverbs, wisdom is a woman speaking up to the men of the world that basically that they should be with her because she's wisdom. And so the mystic will see states as persons. And so, but that's not the full important thing here. It's just he's just sort of mentioning that in the passing. But then he quotes Blake again. He says, eternity exists in all things in eternity, independent of creation, which is an act of mercy. So he says creation. He says this eternity exists, and creation is an act of mercy. So he's basically stating, and I'll just quote Neville here. He says, so when he says eternity exists and all things in eternity independent of creation, which is an act of mercy, he meant that everything that you see in this world is a part of the eternal structure of the universe. And I want to share a dream that I had. And this is when I read this, I remember it triggered this dream, and it correlates so directly with what he's saying that I want to share. So I had a dream about 4 years ago that really shook me out of my sleep, and I remember it clearly. And I found myself in a garden, and it was this, in a sense, an empty land. It was just basically just green grass, and there was nothing really growing. But I knew it was a garden, and it was a really bright sun. I remember the sun being overly bright in this dream, and yet in the middle of this land there was one flower that was being grown here, and I could feel that this garden was like the foundation of love itself. I could feel that this was a symbol of love, and I saw one flower that was growing in the middle of it. And so I went to this flower, and it looked gorgeous. It was a gorgeous little flower. And I stared at it, and I cupped my hand underneath the petals, and I could feel that this flower was forgiveness. And then it said, I just knew that forgiveness is the first flower that blossoms in the garden of love. That's what I felt in the dream. And then all of a sudden, I heard a voice within me. It felt like it was within me and also outside of me. So I heard it in both directions, and it said, forgiveness is an act of mercy. And then I heard, life is conquered by forgiveness. And it was not exactly my voice, but I knew it was almost my voice, but it had more authority to it. And then I started having sort of a thought, and then next thing you know, I would feel this almost intensity in my body. The sun would brighten, and then I'd feel this intense energy in my body. It felt great, but it was this building. So it'd be a thought, and then it would get brighter, and then I would feel this almost vibration in my body building even more. And then another thought would come, and then I'd feel it even more. And this is essentially what it was saying. So it would say, what is forgiveness if it's not forgiving the unforgivable? And then it would get brighter, and then the feeling would build even more. And then it would say, it is an act of mercy because you have the power to destroy yourself, but out of mercy you show forgiveness to yourself. And then it got brighter and brighter again, and then it said, forgiveness is giving yourself exactly what you love, regardless whether you think they or you deserve it. And then it got brighter and brighter and more intense feeling. And then it said, once you forgive, you no longer see what once was, but you see what is, and what is what you love. And then it got brighter and brighter. And I can barely see anything at this point. The feeling was overwhelming me. And the voice got so loud, and it said, life is conquered by forgiveness, and forgiveness is an act of mercy. It is the first flower grown in the garden of love. And at this point, all I could see was just light. That's all it was at this point. And I felt within myself like, I'm about to die. This is it. Like I'm about to explode. And the moment right before I was about to explode, I woke up, and the next thing you know, I felt my body just vibrating as I woke up. And I mean, I had to really think about this dream. I started to think about what Blake said, what he just said right here. It's an act of mercy. And this dream really changed my attitude on this idea of imagining. As I stated in the last video, I said forgiveness creates reality, or this idea of forgiveness, which is imagining oneself to be different. I knew in a sense why, I had all the reasons why I shouldn't imagine myself, all the reasons why I shouldn't forgive myself, all the reasons why I didn't deserve it. But it's an act of mercy. I can hold myself in this bondage. That's how I took the dream. I could hold myself in a bondage my entire life. And I know I can, because I have. And yet, out of mercy, I can give mercy to myself and release myself from this judgment, release myself from whatever is really keeping me in that bondage. I remember this game I used to play when I was a kid, and you'd basically put your fingers in each other's hands, and then you would you would flip your arms, you put palms up, and then you would press against each other, and it would pull on the muscles of your forearms, and it would hurt. And whoever would say mercy would otherwise, in a sense, lose, but you would let go of the person, whoever said mercy first, the game would stop. But that's what it reminded me of, was this, it's an act of mercy. I can hold myself in a bondage my whole life. I can come up with every reason why I'm not allowed to imagine something, why I'm not allowed to be something. But I must show forgiveness as an act of mercy to myself. And so I'm going to quote myself here. I said, you want to feel free, but you're not allowing yourself to feel the feeling because of all these reasons you can think of. Show yourself mercy and forgive yourself entirely to the feeling of freedom. If you're feeling after the things you dislike, show mercy and forgiveness and give yourself up to the feeling that you want in full. You have the power to stop yourself from receiving beautiful things, but I urge you to show mercy towards yourself and forgive. Forgiveness means you give yourself entirely to the feeling and the thoughts you desire. You don't look back. You forget entirely what you just forgave. That's what I mean. You almost move on as if you forgave. But really that's what forgiveness means. It's in our culture, we have this idea of forgiveness, which is just saying that it's okay. Even if it is, you can still hold yourself, even if you say it's okay to yourself, you still hold yourself in a bondage, then you haven't really forgave it yet. And another way of saying you haven't yet yielded to the new idea of yourself. You haven't fully forgave it. It's a complete act of mercy. It's, you feel deep within you that you have all the reasons why you shouldn't forgive yourself, all the reasons why you shouldn't imagine this or imagine that. But it's an act of mercy. You do it regardless, whether you think you deserve it or not. It's the first flower that's grown in the garden of love. So if you start to build this garden within you, in the garden of love, the first flower you start with is forgiveness. The first acts you start doing is forgiveness, and it's an act of mercy. So whenever you think you don't deserve to forgive yourself, you're not understanding what forgiveness is. It's an act of mercy. And you start to grow this in this garden, this first flower. And eventually you're going to have this beautiful, magnificent garden of love that is really within all of us. But the first flower that's grown is forgiveness. And it starts with an act of mercy, seeing it as an act of mercy. And so you never hold yourself in bondage. Remember there's a video I wrote, Never Bar Self, and Neville speaks about how he didn't bar himself. And that is forgiveness. He didn't hold himself to some little idea that the world gave him why he couldn't have something. Well, he wasn't educated enough. He wasn't smart enough. He wasn't this. He wasn't tall enough. And you can give all your reasons why you're not enough. But regardless, you never bar self. It's an act of mercy. You can hold yourself in bondage for your entire life, but you decide not to. And that's the first flower that's grown in your garden. And so you can see why I am heavily attached to this work, because I've never had a work. I've studied many bodies of work, but I've never had these bodies of work where I get these very intense, almost visions, because they're not like dreams. I've had dreams. Dreams can be very much like you're a passenger, and it's just sort of, I heard a joke where you just like you're fixing a go-kart with your landlord. Those kind of dreams. But this is not those kind of dreams. This is it's coherent. It's life-changing. It gives me more intense feelings than really anything in this world. And it's vivid. So I can't say it's simply a dream. It feels more than a dream. And I would just call that a vision. But it's practical. Even though it's a symbolic representation of love and forgiveness, it's very practical to my life. And it's very practical to anyone's life, because who doesn't need forgiveness? Who doesn't need to forgive themselves? Neville said it in the other lecture. Like, who can look at themselves in the mirror and say that they've never thought anything unlovely in their life? They never thought of anything hateful, anything evil in their life. Everyone's done it. We're put in a land of good and evil. Everyone's entertained evil. But regardless, you forgive yourself. And if you don't forgive yourself, you don't know that forgiveness is an act of mercy. And so I'm going to do obviously more parts on this lecture, because he gets more into the law and practicing it as well. But this is what I took from, this part. This is just the first page of the lecture that I'm reading. So a lot more to come on this one. But I'm going to end this one here. I do hope that my dream sort of also freed you, and you could see how impactful that would be to the dreamer himself, which was me. It was very impactful to me. And so I hope it was impactful to you as well. But I'm going to end it here. But again, I need to share that I do live Q&As. I answer questions and things like that on the members channel. And I also do one-on-ones as well. So you can just email me in the description. It'll all be there. And this Friday, this December 13th, I'm doing a public live where I'll be doing Q&As and speaking as well. And that will be at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I hope to see you there. Again, thank you guys for listening.